expert in this area. So I will stay on the back while participating entirely to the event. And I'm giving immediately the floor to our leader at FSR Global, Shweta Bhagwat. Shweta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor. I think it gives great pleasure for the Florence School of Regulation to host one-of-a-kind event, and it's so female dominated. So I think it's my absolute pleasure to co-host this along with wonderful ladies from the sector. And I think what's interesting about this is that it's also talking about a topic that's very pertinent about energy transition, but keeping in mind on how gender plays an important role in that. And for you today, we have three of the main editors of the book, Engendering the Energy Transition. We have Joy Clancy, we have Tabitha Singh, and then we have Marielle, who will be giving us a round of how they have been processing the various aspects of this book. And I think what's interesting about this is it has a multi-dimensional and a multi-sectorial approach to how the energy transition story pans out in the global north and in the global south. So it would be very interesting to listen from them and sort of learn, to be excited to be learning from them, and also sort of making all of this knowledge available to the network. So I would like to give the floor to Joy, who will kickstart the day through this wonderful book that's just launched. Joy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shweta. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and also a very special thank you to the Florence School of Regulation, who we do have a history of cooperation with. So it's good that we are continuing with this. And it's really good that you managed to organise this during the week in which we celebrate International Women's Day. So I think well, the group of us, of editors, were really excited when we saw that. So yes, I'm going to give a little introduction to the process and some of the key take-homes we have from the book. So could I have the first slide, please? Right, well, I think I want to talk about the way that we did the book, because I think that's an important part of what you are able to read. We brought together a group of people, men as well. Okay, you've only got women on this platform, but there were men involved also in the book. And we must remember that gender is about more than women, it's about women and men. So that we brought people from research, from policy and practice. And they came both from the energy sector and the non-energy sector. One of the reasons for doing that is that the energy sector has been particularly slow in taking up gender as a broad issue. And so we thought that, we knew that sectors like water, health, forestry, agriculture had been much faster at this. So we thought, well, we can learn from them. We also wanted to talk about North and South. The North, again, has also been very tardy in taking up the issue, but certainly within Europe, there's been a huge interest, and that's what Marielle is going to talk about. We came from different disciplines, and we came from different parts of the world. And you see that also reflected in our panel, and two of the other editors, one comes from Turkey originally and one from Mexico. So we represented a considerable geography as well in the team, and also amongst the authors. And what we set out to do was to see what we did and didn't know about gender and the energy transition. So, of course, as academics, we always want to know what else can I research. So it's always important to know what we don't know, as well as what we know. And part of helping with the energy transition was that we wanted to identify theories, methods, tools, which bring particular insights and a deeper understanding of what is going on. And we talked also, although we use the word gender, we are also using gender as an umbrella term for a lot of other issues, particularly related to social inclusion. And I'm going to say some more about that in a moment. Now, the book comes from a symposium that we organised a few years ago. And what we did at the symposium, which we then transferred also into the book writing process, was that part of the learning from each other was to have a reflection on each presentation, each chapter, by somebody who comes from a completely different perspective. And we found that really, and I think when you come to read those, I think that you will see that that produce a lot of rich material. So I think, and so I think that was something we also enjoyed it. I think also the authors themselves got a lot out of it. I mean, I can speak for my chapters that I certainly sort of revised my thinking a lot from the reflections that I got. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm going to give you quickly some of the key take-homes. This is some of the things that I particularly got out. If you ask the others, then you get a different set. I think one thing that is noticeable is that the energy sector is becoming more gender aware. Now, that's not to say the same as it's becoming more responsive. That is still a long way down the line, I think. And what has come out of this, particularly the work that Mariella has been doing, is looking at gender issues in the European Union. I think she's going to share some of those with you as well. I think one of the interesting ongoing discussions is about how and what we measure. And I think that is particularly an ongoing issue. And I think that the how question, I think that comes out nicely in a number of the chapters. And I think that who decides what we measure is also an interesting issue. I think particularly in the context of health, there's lots of work done on household air pollution, but I think we found 8 papers, I think it was, on the damage to spine and internal organs of carrying heavy weights like fuel, wood and water on your head for 30 or more years. Why? That's an interesting question. I think also one of the things that is that we really need to be aware of simplistic assumptions about outcomes. I mean, it's quite common in particularly, I would say, in practice literature to read that, if you give a woman a job, then she's empowered, that she gets to take decisions in the household. That's far too simplistic. You cannot assume that, and it takes more than a job to. And I think a lot of women, as a context of the COVID crisis, are realizing this to actually change a lot in the system. I think also from a research perspective, and also I should say from a development policy implementation perspective, context matters. That what you do in one country or even within one region in a country may not work in another country or another area. It depends a lot on the social context in which you are working. I think also the other thing relates to the acceptance of qualitative data. I think that's something that I detect is changing, or perhaps it's only the people I work with, but certainly people who are quantitative tend to have been in the past very resistant to dealing with qualitative data. Yet qualitative data offers insights and explanation of quantitative data. And so I think that you're beginning to see, there's a good paper by Natalie Holfoot in the journal, in the book, which draws on showing how she had to use qualitative data to explain really interesting quantitative data she's got about what's going on intra-householdly. And I think one of the other things that has come very strongly through this is, and this is something that gender helps to open up, is to take an intersectional approach, that men and women are not two homogeneous groups. They are much more complex than that. And I think that intersectionality brings that to the fore. So I think that there's some really interesting stuff in the book that demonstrates this. So that finishes now what I have to say. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Tabitha Singh, and she's going to talk about some really interesting piece of work. Although perhaps Tabitha talking about the food sector at lunchtime was probably not such a good choice. But okay, over to you, Tabitha.
Thank you very much, Joy, and thank you to FSR for this opportunity. So just to start, I will go on right away to say, so like in many development thoughts and processes, the Global South has provided the beginning, the start of new hope. The South has also presented an opportunity for development, the correction of mistakes made by the North, and an opportunity to apply and revise lessons from the Global North. But in the rush to create something new policies, new ways of energy generation, of building, of providing basic services such as water, energy, housing, new ways of agriculture, we also seem to forget that countries are not homogeneous. The contexts are different and therefore require different approaches and solutions in policymaking, regulation, and implementation. In the Global South, the complexities are more pronounced by other factors such as poverty, underdevelopment, lack of service delivery, gender relations, and other issues. This book also highlights that the South has a lot of lessons to offer to the North. And like Joy has stated, context matters. So over the years, it is becoming clearer that issues of energy, water, agriculture, climate change in the North and the South touch on a common subject, the subject of gender. Evidence from the studies in the South during the early days of electrification in the rural areas, particularly in South Africa, for instance, showed that when households were provided with electricity for the first time, when it came to household appliances, it was clear that there were divisions between what men and women chose. Men opted for entertainment and power appliances, the latter which was used for business or enterprise development, and women opted for kitchen appliances, more to ease the burden of household chores. We can all agree that boiling water in an electric kettle is much more convenient than doing it on a kerosene stove or on an outside fireplace. So when we look at the importance of social and political aspects of the transitions in the energy system, for the Global South, the important thing that this book does is to draw attention to the understudied social and political aspects of the transitions in the energy system and the nexus with the gender roles and relations. We as authors contribute to the debate by raising legitimate questions such as what is the role of gender in the development of an energy system, and whether men and women benefit equitably by the introduction of low carbon energy technologies, and in which ways do they benefit? Can I have the next slide, please? So energy transition in an African informal food sector. One of the opening chapters is titled Energy Transition and Gender in the Informal Street Food Sector in Africa. I'm one of the authors of this chapter. So here we look at the informal food sector, and it is very important, and it's a very important sector. And in some African countries, it can provide up to 40 to 60% of total employment. The main focus on this sector is because of the intensive energy use to process and cook food. It's also a sector that is driven by women. The sector is dominated by women, especially in the African continent. Our study proved what was stated in the literature, and we found that in the 3 countries that we surveyed, 63% of the informal enterprises were owned and operated by women compared to the 37% run by men. We also proved that in the informal food sector, the sector is not survivalist at all, that is like it's always believed. And it has been documented by a lot of studies that it's survivalist, but it's not. The people in this, and in this case, women that own and operate these informal enterprises in the informal food sector are not only doing it to survive, but also have aspirations to grow. They have aspirations to grow their businesses, and with that, they want to also be able to access modern energy services. And this is not well documented in the literature that we went through when we were writing this chapter, and in the findings, pointed to something different. And also energy choice, and there are complex determining factors in how people choose their energy sources that they use. We're all in agreement that in order for the informal food sector to survive and continue to provide means of income for those that find themselves in the informal employment, there has to be access to affordable, clean, easily accessible energy services. The informal food sector is so complex because energy use is determined by a lot of factors, not only access to modern energy, but the type of energy needed to prepare a specific type of food. So we cannot claim to completely transition to a low carbon economy without taking into consideration these important energy issues, but also the important issue of gender. It's also an important environmental issue whereby those in the informal food sector are exposed to harmful emissions from coal and wood. And this takes us back to the question of how will the ordinary men and women that find themselves in the informal economy, especially energy-intensive businesses such as those in the informal food sector, benefit from the planned energy transition? And what does an energy transition mean here? I will address this issue during the discussion as it touches on the policy and regulation implications of the energy transition. For now, I give over to my colleague, Marielle. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia, and thank you, FSR, for inviting us to host this webinar and to present our book in which we share our combined knowledge, disciplines, and backgrounds to look at energy transitions through a gender lens. What I'm going to emphasize is how the global north, and in our book chapter, we focus on the European Union, how the global north can learn from the experience in the global south, and how the gender analysis and the gender and energy nexus that is mostly based on empirical data and on research in the global south can be a very useful tool and a framework to look at energy access, energy transition in the European Union through a gender lens. And we, when we were looking at the European Union and the energy access and how the gender relations play out, we were, well, a bit surprised to see that that basically in the European Union, there are quite a lot of people still lacking access to affordable, clean, and sustainable energy. Even in one of our case studies, Bulgaria, and we learned that still women, and especially women, are using firewood, for example, during the winter times and during the summer for cooking and heating their houses. So when we look at energy poverty and emphasize energy poverty in the European Union, we learned that 1 out of 7 households are not able to afford the energy they need to live comfortable in their homes. And when we add the gender dimension to it, we identified 3 different dimensions or 3 different perspectives that could contribute in analyzing energy poverty through a gender lens and understand the differences between men and women in energy poverty, in the energy poverty situation in the European Union. We identified first the social dimension. The social dimension resonates with the social concept of gender. Gender is about the relation between men and women, the roles men and women play within society, the responsibilities, needs, and uses that are addressed based on the gender division of, for example, household tasks. Well, even in Europe, we see, and the European Institute of Gender Equality, EIGE, proves that with their regular EIGE gender equality indexes, that there's still a big gender gap within the European Union. And we have a long way to go to have a gender balance in society. That also plays a role in household energy use, where we still see that roughly 80% of the women are responsible for household tasks compared to 46% of the men. So we see that the energy intensive chores in the households are the women that are the main actors in the household having energy needs. if we look at the economic dimension, we see that more women than men are struggling to pay their energy bills, also because of the gender income gap that is still present in Europe. With the differences that women earn less money than men, comes also the differences in, for example, the houses where men and women are living in, and the sort of tenure. Women are overrepresented in as tenants, and especially in social housing, and in less energy efficient housing. So with the current retrofitting contributions of the European Union and the current energy efficiency projects within the European Union, we could estimate that more women than men would profit from that, because they would profit from a more energy efficient home. However, the policy instruments that are used are basically, for example, tax reliefs or subsidies. And in many countries only are addressed by those that are homeowners. So we might see that there is a gender differences there in access to policy instruments that relieve energy poverty by energy efficiency projects. From a biological perspective, we see that, and especially when we use the intersectional lens and also look at age differences and different groups between men and between women, that there is a biological difference how people experience, for example, ambient temperature. There's a biological difference between men and women of roughly 2 degrees Celsius of the ambient temperature. And this temperature difference, or this temperature preference, is even emphasized when you look at aging, and especially the elder age group. We know women in Europe are still getting older than men, so there's a demographic difference there. That the older you get, the more difficulties your body has to regulate your own temperature. So you might be more vulnerable to, for example, cold temperatures in the house or hot temperatures in the house during the summer. So that plays out if you're living in energy poverty and having difficulties of to heat your homes in the winter or to cool your homes during a hot summer. There is a gender difference in there, which is, for example, emphasized and reported in the project FEMIMED, which is executed in which is carried out by the city of Madrid. So when we use these 3 gender dimensions to examine and analyze energy poverty to a gender lens, we came with the following observations. Next slide, please. Can I see the next slide? Thank you. The observations and recommendations. The header of the slide is failing, but it should say observations and recommendations. We can make the following observation and recommendations based on our chapter in which we studied the energy poverty situation in the global north, but also these observations play out in different chapters throughout the book. So as emphasized before, the context definitely matters. Not only among the different European Union member states, we see contextual differences and cultural differences, but also between the North and the South. And so we really need to be aware of this contextual elements. So we need to have both generic indicators and definitions of, for example, gender and energy poverty, but they need to be flexible enough to resonate with the context. Also, the causes and the consequences of inequalities are asking for an intersectional approach in which we need to make sure that there is enough gender disaggregated data, for example. we still see that the household as an entity is used in both research and policy without dissecting who are the different users within the households, without reflecting the different household compositions. For example, in Europe, 1/3 of the household is a one-person household, and there is huge differences in ages, for example. And also not reflecting the fact that there is a fluidity in households with multi-generational households, caregiving responsibilities, etc. We would, well, if we would use more gender disaggregated data, then this fluidity and the household composition will be more visible, which could be feeding into more tailored policy interventions and instruments. And furthermore, a cross-sectoral coordination is necessary to not, but also to acknowledge that, for example, energy transition is not only the responsibility of an energy ministry or an energy department, but it also has impacts on housing, on urban planning, on social welfare, and on other related sectors. For example, what we have demonstrated in the book, that we also included a chapter on the water sector, a chapter on climate change, on agriculture. So there we see there is this interplay of different sectors that is asking for cross-sectoral coordination and multi-level governance and decentralization as well to engender the energy transition by using the combination of methodology and data available that would feed in to more tailored policy recommendations as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. Can I give it back to Joy?
I think it needs to go back to
Joy,
the chair of the session.
Marielle. I think it was a
sorry.
very interesting presentation. Yeah. Thank you. I think it was super interesting. I think you all touched upon very important points, and I think two things stand out. One, I think, is the multi-stakeholder engagement. Both Marielle and Joy did rightly emphasize on that a lot more of us need to be talking to each other so that we can sort of pass on the knowledge and the know-how and make sure that it trickles down to where it should. So not just in the rooms that the decisions are making, but rather also on the implementation side of things. And I think there, Nitabi did bring out the nuance of understanding the local context. And I think that's very interesting in the Global South as well. Coming from the Global South, I can say that sometimes you just can't cut, copy, paste solutions. I think no two places are the same. And we have seen this challenge when we address energy access as an issue across the world. And of course, something that was very rightly pointed out, given that we have had a cleaner slate, we got to be more experimental in how we approach this topic bottom up in the Global South. But I think a lot of interesting lessons to be shared between the two geographies. So in the interest of time, I'm going to have 5 minutes for the editors to discuss, and then we have a couple of interesting questions from the audience. So we'll split it 5 and 5. And then at the end, Jessica will highlight to us on an initiative of the school. But in the meanwhile, I encourage people to do check out the link of the book so that you can explore the various chapters that the authors did touch upon. I can tell you from first-hand, having skimmed through the book, that they've just barely scratched the surface. So do dig and look at the different aspects of the book. So maybe I'll give the floor to Tabitha Singh. You said a very interesting question while you're closing your slide on what really is energy transition when you're talking about all of this. I think, and that's a wonderful question to open the floor with. You are muted.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that you'd pick on me immediately. Okay, so I mean, for me, so in addressing the regulation implications of energy transition, so first, when we talk of an energy transition, we also have to consider the financing mechanism of that transition. Where will the money come from? In the Global North, this is and was also a question for those that considered this step. for them, approaching development funders is much easier than it is for many global South countries. We have to carefully consider what we put down as guarantee if we're not able to repay the transaction debt. Many countries in the South are in debt and owing many of the same DFIs that they seek to finance from for the energy transition, also for water infrastructure, agriculture, environmental management. Yes, there is some climate finance that can be accessed by countries in the global South, but that is not enough to ensure that we implement a just energy transition. A transition that will not only ensure energy security, but that economic opportunities during the transition are equally accessible to men and women, that low-income households will be able to afford renewable energy services, and that ownership and that there is equitable share of the new and renewable energy and other systems, so that no one is left behind. Also, we need to consider the terms and conditions that the lenders outline in order for the transition finance to be made accessible. Are those terms and conditions in line with the policies and regulation frameworks of countries in the global South? If not, then we need to go back to the drawing board and ask, what is the required policy and regulation framework to facilitate a just energy transition? Let those terms be determined by all stakeholders to ensure that the transition is a just one, and that it considers all the issues that need to be considered, especially the gender issue. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Would Gul or Lillian like to jump in and add to the debate, since we have had the opportunity of others? Okay, maybe I'll just read out a couple of questions that we have. I think one of the recurring questions from the audience is, how do we factor in the pandemic effect, and how has that sort of changed the dynamics of this issue? I think very important, given that the informal sector was impacted a lot in the global South, yes, and also that the additional burden that women have had to take given the situation of pandemic. So would Joy, Marielle, or anyone like to jump in? Just feel free to unmute and jump in. Yeah, Marielle, the floor is yours.
Yes, indeed, the impact of the pandemic and the current COVID crisis is something we discussed among the Energy Poverty Research Network Engager as well. It's still quite early to measure the impacts. We still see many governments have have specific regulations, relief measures, etc. But when they play out, when they are not prolonged, we definitely will see the impact on energy poverty. And especially among women with flexible short-term contracts, they are often the first to lose their jobs. They are also, especially in Europe, it's a group that are responsible for homeschooling, caregiving task. We all know that working from home also makes sure that you will have a higher energy consumption at home. So yes, it's still quite early to say this impact for Europe in at least, but a call for more gender disaggregated data again will definitely help to make the impact of COVID on men and women in energy poverty in Europe more visible.
Thank you. Maybe another follow-up question, very interesting one from Wendy. She says that when we do discuss about energy transition, there is the component that we focus on, which is the just aspect, but sometimes that just aspect doesn't focus on gender. So how do we sort of integrate and balance? Because if you pick one, you sometimes tend to lose the other.
Can I go?
Yes, of course. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Wendy, for that question. And we were asking ourselves a similar question. You know, what happens if an energy transition plans don't consider gender? Of course, we can expect an increased inequalities, especially in countries that are already experiencing inequalities in access to income, basic services, economic opportunities between men and women. If the transition policies and regulation mechanisms do not ensure equity and equal access to opportunities provided by transitions, as well as access to energy and other services, it means the coming generation has no chance at addressing the inequality gap. We know that in South Africa, the inequality gap is so much. The gap between the rich and the poor is so huge. There is no chance of us addressing that if we don't put that into the plans of our energy transition right now. So an energy transition is an opportunity not only for the energy sector to start anew, but for governments to correct the wrongs of the past and ensure that no one, especially no man, no woman, is left behind. Yeah, I'll stop there for now. Maybe one of my colleagues would like to add to that.
Yes, would someone else like to take the floor? Or probably I'll drop in a connected question, which is also very interesting. It says it takes more than just having a job to empower a woman. And so what other dimensional or measures should be recommended when we're looking at policies? Of course, here it's not just about any job. I think Tabitha touched upon it in a slide. It's also about having a productive and a more stable income that would actually leapfrog you from the state of economic position you are to a slightly better place. So I think any comments from the other authors? I have a question from Marina on that.
Yeah, well, I think that even in the energy transition is also an opportunity to move beyond the role of women as only as energy consumers, not to, like the chapters in with an emphasis on the global south demonstrated that women play quite a huge role in the energy production. Also in Europe, there are women working in the energy sector as producers, still not as many as men, or we still see a very huge gender gap in that, although the renewable energy sector seems to hire more women at the moment than men. So there is a slight change there, but also in decision making. And I think that, for example, energy communities, new forms of energy, collaborations, local energy initiatives might become a new platform for the different roles of women in the energy sector. But no, and in that sense, I'm still happy that Jean-Michel is joining us. I do believe that gender just energy transitions are not only the responsibility for women, but equally for men. So maybe Jean-Michel, you want to respond to that?
You don't have to respond, it's obvious. It doesn't make any sense if men were not participating into inclusion and into promotion. Promotion is not to do something fantastic. Promotion is to acknowledge we are the same, we are equal, we have differences, but these differences are non-essential, non-consequential, at least shouldn't be. I am the father of 2 daughters. Oh, when I think that my daughters can be discriminated, I'm totally I'm voiceless, and I feel some hatred because I don't understand why. And the more we give possibility of women to act and to react, the more interesting life is to be, and the more productive we are. I can testify. I'm director of a team of 25 people. And the fact of practicing inclusion gives a lot of dynamism to relations and a lot of effectiveness to the work. So it's the same everywhere in the society, and it's the same in any societies. I know a little bit more India because Shweta is with us many years now, and I can see that in any society it can be the same and it should be the same. So I have nothing extraordinary to tell you, but you can hear from my voice that I'm deeply concerned, and I'm very happy being with you, and I'm very happy learning from you.
Thank you, Professor. And I think it's a wonderful event because we have diversity and inclusion right here at the panel, I think from all over the world. And I think that's beautiful. And thanks to technology, we're able to do that. So I think it gives us hope that going forward to the 2030, 2050 goals, we can speed track because nothing is stopping us from collaborating. So on that note, probably I'll give Joy the floor for a minute to sort of conclude on the book and encourage our audience to sort of dive in deeper. And then Jessica, the floor will be yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, a couple of interesting questions didn't actually get answered, responded to in the chat. But two of them actually are referring to intersectionality and about what we consider as intersectionality. Well, intersectionality is you break down groups across a whole range of indicators. And you said that our team represents a diversity. In some respects, yes, but in other ways, it doesn't. We are all highly educated. And I think that one of the things I was saying about what we about the who decides what research, I think that's some of the things that the people who've been involved in the book, including Lillian, who's been very quiet, is that Lillian comes a lot, has a background in activism. And I think that one of the things that Lillian has brought to our thinking is the way that we try to bring voices from the bottom, from the people who don't have PhDs or are not full professors like me, how they get to influence what is researched, or that they get to influence more the policies that are made on their behalf. And I think that is, I think, something we really are. Our book, our symposium, has really started at least with this group of people to at least think about some of those issues. There is quite, if you know anything about feminist political ecology, there is a researcher called Diane Richelieu. And one of the things she says, which I quote in my book, is that this is work in process, not work in progress, but work in process. And I think that to me has been one of the things that, who's been doing research for a rather long time, is one of the things that has really excited me about this collaboration I've had with this great group of people. We do represent different ages. I'm not going to give away all of the ages, but we do at least represent that. And I think that's been to me the exciting thing, is seeing young people coming through who come with different approaches, different ideas. And I think to me that's really exciting. I think that that's something that I hope is going to grow out of this. And I think, I see somebody's asking Lillian, you've got a chapter in the book about activism. They've got to read your PhD thesis. That's when that comes. So I'm giving you an advert already. Watch this space. But I think so. That's really what I would say. And I think somebody asked about sexual violence. Irrespective of orientation. And I think in the renewable energy sector, I don't think it's different to any other sector, but it's something that needs to be revealed, certainly, and it's a difficult topic, because depending on anywhere in the world, but in certain countries of the world, it's a very difficult subject to actually ask in an open space. So I think those are some of the issues also that we need to be looking into, how we make things much more revelatory, much more inclusive. So thank you, and thank you for giving us this opportunity, FSR. So great work.
Thank you, Joy, for summing that up so well. Kiera, could we have the last slide up? Jessica, the floor is all yours to sort of present to our audience what other initiative we do and how they can participate in this ongoing effort to assimilate knowledge. Next slide.
Thank you, Sveta.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists. It was really, really interesting to learn about your book and the importance of intersectionality. Really came through from the discussion and also skimming through the book. I love to see that it was a step in putting it into practice as well. I would just like to take a few seconds to share, for those of you who don't know, a little information about our Lights on Women initiative, which has been doing work to shape a more inclusive and gender equal school at the Florence School of Regulation. So I'd like to highlight just 3 of our activities that we invite you to be a part of. The first, and actually the great way that I came to know Marielle was through our Lights on Women scholarship, which happens each year. We will be announcing our 3rd edition soon in the coming months. So we invite you to register for our newsletter so that you can be aware when that comes. Second, we love to work with women in energy to amplify their voices, amplify their experiences, and we do so through the FSR Knowledge Hub. So if you have, if you're working on a really interesting PhD topic, linked to gender or not, where we don't want to pigeonhole women and say they only can work on specific topics. So on whatever topic of expertise you have, feel free to reach out to me and we can work together and collaborate to create an article or a podcast. And going off that, to make sure that the school is including diverse voices in its research disseminations and scientific communications. We've launched the Energy Expert List as a tool to help us place the right people in the right topics and the right activities. So I invite you to sign up for the Energy Expert List, to reach out to me at any time to discuss our activities further. And most importantly, I think I'd like to just take the last minute to say that I think that the biggest thing that Lights on Women has become is a forum. Our aim is to bring in these kinds of discussions to the Florence School and give the experts who are doing excellent work on them the space to discuss them and share their findings. So we would love to continue doing that. And when we do, especially when these topics focus on gender, I see that we have a lot of participants here with us. And this issue is raised a few times between the talk. Please take the extra step to invite your male colleagues to join, because these issues shouldn't be just researched by women. They shouldn't be just tackled by women, as was discussed, and they shouldn't be just studied by or women. Men should take an interest too. And we see from our participant list that as we have more and more of these events, the participants are mostly female. So if I can leave you with anything, I leave you with the call to action to invite your male colleagues, loop them into the discussion, and take them on this journey with you step by step. Thank you so much for your time, and we will see you. We'll see you next time.